Okay, time for a quick sound check just to make sure it's all working. So you know the score, folks. If you could just pop a comment in the live chat to let me know it's working, that you can see me and that you can hear me. And I will see you in 9 minutes 30 seconds. Catch you later. Hello, good evening everyone. Welcome to In Studio Live, the 93rd edition. And tonight we're talking all about sharpening images and how to get the sharpest image possible. So welcome. Nice to have a few people back watching who've been absent for a few weeks. I have noted, I've got it marked down, you know, not turning up. Black marks against you. Right, no, seriously, it's good to have you all with us, and nice to see people. Do say hi in the chat, and I can see a couple of other people just saying hello on there. I've greeted a few people in the chat before we went live, but hi to Barry, hi to Bernard, who've just joined us by the looks of things. So let's get going, shall we? Let's get the show underway. And Walter, welcome as well. Right, okay, so what have we got on the show tonight? Well, it's all about sharpening and image sharpness. I'm going to give you some really practical tips for making sharper images, to get your images really at the quality that they ought to be. And I'm also going to look at a little bit of the theory behind sharpening in post-production and run you through how to do frequency separation sharpening of images. So, two main parts to that. The first part is very practical. It's what you do in camera, and it's probably more aimed at the beginner level, if that's you. If you've been doing photography for any length of time, then you will probably know most of those tips, but having a reminder on them is probably no bad thing anyway. So I'm going to go through that. Then the second part about the post-production side of sharpening is much more advanced stuff. So that will be for those of you who are a bit long in the tooth, who've been doing photography for a long while and perhaps just need to get to grips and understand what's happening and why we need to do sharpening, and really to perhaps understand frequency separation as well. So that's where we're going. But of course, I'm also going to do image feedback as I do every week, and I will reveal at the end whose image is the Facebook image of the week. So don't forget to post your photos up on Facebook during the week. It's great that people are sending me them in email, but if you stick them up there as well, it means I've got a choice of images for the photo of the week, and it might be yours next week. So that's what's coming up. Right, let's get underway, shall we? Let's get this show on the road and start off with some image feedback. So head over to Lightroom, and I'm going to go through the ones which were sent by email first. Now, long-time viewers will know how this works. Hang on, that's last week's. That's not the ones I was looking. That's confusing. I thought those were this week's. Hang on, let's have a look at me. I am now confused on this. That is the current import. Ah, I see what's gone on here. The reason I was getting confused is these two images of Richard's I dealt with last week, but they've ended up in this week's set as well. So no offense, Richard, sorry, I haven't got yours to go through this week. Did them last week. I shall remove those from Lightroom. Right, okay, so that means I've just got 3 which were sent by email this week, all from Gary. Now, let's have a look. This is the first one, which is up in Edinburgh. Is it just me, or whenever I see Edinburgh Castle like this, I always think of Colditz? It just reminds me of Colditz for some reason. Right, okay, this is a spot colour one. Now, people either love or hate the concept of spot colour. I'm somewhere in between. I like it if it's done well. I think it can be overdone. I think it can look absolutely awful when done badly. And I know that because I've done it badly myself, and I've hopefully learned from my mistakes. Right, okay, so this particular image, before I look at the settings on it, the spot colour work has been done well. I do like the idea of a red telephone box in there. That works well. It looks a good conversion. The only thing I would say is, the way you've done the conversion, Gary, with it, is you've got the colour coming through the telephone box. The way I would have done that conversion is slightly different. I can show you, so I'll go to the develop module and over here. Now, I want you to assume the image is in full colour, and what I would do, this is the best way to do, I find the best way to do spot colouring, is go to the colour section here, and actually HSL will do nicely, and basically what we want is the red goes up and everything, well, let me just zoom in and reset that. You can see that orange colour through there. Well, we can now take that out by bringing all the other colours down, and that's left just the red colour in there. And it's not true black and white within the within that bit, but it's taken most of it out, and I think that worked better for the conversion on there. Now, one of the problems that you can have with doing this sort of spot colour is you compromise the black and white in there, and I think that needs a bit more contrast. Now, this may be a problem doing it at this stage, but I think it just needs those blacks going a little bit blacker in there, and maybe just a hint of clarity to it, and just raise the shadows slightly. So the difference is from that to that, and it just adds that little bit of extra bite. Now, one other thing to say on this one, Gary, is the sky. I know this is probably one of those horrible grey days, and in fact I can tell it is by the fact that there's no shadows, and the sky, the pure white sky, for me spoils this image a little bit. So you could try a sky replacement over in Photoshop. So if I just go over to Photoshop, edit in Adobe Photoshop, let's edit a copy with the Lightroom adjustments, and let's see if we can find a sky that might actually help this one. Now, there is a thing with sky replacements. We can choose horrible skies which don't work with the rest of the image, and it may be, as I look through this, I can't find one that will work. So edit, sky replacement, and basically I'm just going to look through for something which might be conceivable with this. That sort of sky is quite conceivable to work with it, because that would account for the grey day on there. With that, anything else that we might do, not sunset, and we'll go with that. So now let's see what else we want to do. I'll bring the brightness. I was going to try and bring the, yeah, that's it. I forgot these aren't real-time sliders. They only really work once you a little bit more, something like that. So we've got a bit more texture to it, and I tend to then think about doing a scale on here just to try and get it to match, and I think just that much just brings enough in there to do that. So let's go with that. and we're done on there. Now that is actually in colour, that sky. You can't tell with it, but it genuinely is in colour. So what we would want to do is get rid of all the colour in there. And the easiest way to do that is just go back over into Lightroom. Yes. Get rid of that, saving 99%. And over to Lightroom. So we've got it in there. And just to make the most of it is K for the adjustment brush and reset all the effects on there. And we do, actually what we did before should have dealt with that, because no, this is a different image, isn't it? It's a different image, so we still do need to do it. Thinking about it, we want to take the saturation right down to 0. I'm going to go with a large brush. I'm using the square bracket to make it large, and basically I can just paint out any hint of colour that's left in there, and I don't think there was much at all with that on there. So I would do something like that, Gary, to make that whole image work. Come out of the adjustment brush K, and if I wanted to spend a bit more time, I'd probably try and put a bit more contrast into that sky that's in there. But can you see, folks, with something like this, regular viewers will know I've been a bit critical about sky replacement. That's because I do believe it gets used badly, using clouds that couldn't tie up with the rest of the scene, using clouds at the wrong distance as well on there. But done properly, done something sympathetically like that, it can work and can help improve the image that we're working with. So just so that you can see, that's the edited version, that was the original. So that's the difference that the sky makes, and I think that helps the image along and makes this work. I did say I was going to look at the settings on there. Right, EXIF, let's see if there's anything I need to know from that. No, interesting. The depth of field, the aperture you've chosen, presumably because it was dark on there to do it. It was a fairly dull day with it. So yeah, that all works. Let's move on to another one of Gary's. Quite like this. A very E.C. Escher on it. The fact that these architectural features look like steps going down, and yet we're looking up, and it has this weird effect to it. Now, one thing to think about with this, let's just look at the settings. Yeah, wide angle, 40th of a second. Yeah, all good settings on there. Is the angle this line. Now, you've put it around the 3rd. I wonder, and I'm not going to be able to do this properly on here, but I wonder if it had a bit more of a tilt to it, and if you could have got that more along the 45-degree line, how that would have worked. And that certainly doesn't, because I'm losing too much at the bottom. Interesting one. I'd also be interested to see what it was like if that was straight up the middle with it on there. So I'm just going to reset that crop. The more I try playing with it, the more I can see why you've done it as you have. Yeah. I like the monochrome effect. It's a monochrome, by the looks of it, a monochrome conversion, and then with just a little bit of color grading going on to give it a very slight sepia effect on there, and that works nicely with it. Good subject. Yeah, it's just this chopping off of it there, that it just looks a little bit accidental on that. Yeah, I don't know whether that bit more of an angle with it, whether it works or not. Let's see if I can cheat this a long way. Yeah, I'm not sure. Actually, I've got a thought. I have a thought. What if we went to a square and something like that? I find that quite intriguing. I'd love to see it go to that angle, go to the corner with it, but something like that where it does look like it's steps going down. Try experimenting with your crops on it, Gary, on there, but a good image. Right, trees. But birchen edge by the looks of it. Let's have a look at the shooting data. 61mm, yeah, normal sort of lens, center weighted on there. Interesting, that center weighted average on the Sony, I don't know, I think I've asked this before, but I'm never quite sure which cameras I've asked it about. Is there no equivalent to matrix shooting, or was it a very definite decision that you went to center weighted rather than a matrix style or evaluative in Canon world on there? It's a nice shot. It's a really good black and white conversion, and I like the fact that the trees are on the lighter bit of the sky, so that they stand out. They do all appear to be leaning just slightly. Now, I don't know whether that is to do with the fact that the wind had them doing that, or whether they just need that much of a tilt just to square them up a little bit. It's the fact that they were all appeared to tilt. I don't know, but I would just look at that. Now we've got a tilting horizon, so the only thing we can do with that is if I undo my crops on there. What we would have to do is we'd have to do it using transform guided, and we want that one straight, certainly. And I would say that's my other angle I want straight. So that does that. Now that horizon's not quite as bent, but if we want it actually straight as well, we can do that, and that will bend it back into position. I think that little tweak to it, to my mind, makes it more interesting. Don't know whether you agree with me on that or not, Gary, with that. So that's those. Let's head back out of Lightroom. Oh, and John Barton's joined us. Hi, John. Good to have you with us on that. We've got a good number tonight. This is good. Right, okay. Let's sort of move on. Yeah, if you want me to do the more in-depth sort of feedback that I do with the emailed images, that's the email address to send them to me, feedback@ians-studio.co.uk, and I have absolutely no problem with you posting an image to the Facebook group and then emailing the large image to me for me to have a look at on the show in more detail. In fact, I would quite like it if you did that, folks. So let's move on. Let's head to our topic for the evening. Excuse me a moment. We are looking at making sharper images. And this first part of what I want to talk about tonight is really the practical tips for getting sharper images in camera, because post-production sharpening can only make images which were in focus and in focus and sharp in camera. It can't rescue those blurred images. So it's important that you get good images to start with, and then the post-production type of sharpening can take them to the next level. So I want to go through a whole load of tips for making sure you get sharp images when you're shooting. And this will apply to all types of cameras. Some things probably more towards your mirrorless DSLR bridge type cameras where you've got a bit more control, but a lot of the techniques do apply to whatever camera you're working with. The first thing to say is a matter of reality, that more expensive lenses will typically give sharper images. And there's a saying in photography, and that is invest in the glass. If you spend your money on the lenses, you'll reap a better benefit than spending the money on the camera bodies. The reality is, I think the stat I read somewhere was that people tend to keep a camera body for between 3 and 5 years and tend to keep lenses on average for about 10 years. So you're better off investing in the glass, and that will improve things far more than buying a more expensive camera body on there. You'll get sharper images, basically. It's also worth noting that if you are really keen on getting the sharpest images possible, go for a prime lens. They will be much, much more sharper than a zoom lens. Why is it? Because every piece of glass that the light has to pass through from subject to sensor will add just a little bit of softness in there. The more expensive the glass, which is why the more expensive lenses, is because more work's gone in to refine the optics in there. But if you've got fewer bits of glass in there, and prime lenses have fewer because you don't have to have things to cope with all the zooming, you will get sharper images. So if you're really concerned about a sharp image, shoot with a prime lens. The other thing that I would say is typically the shorter or smaller the zoom range is, the sharper the images. If you've got a lens which goes from 28mm to 300mm, don't expect that to be as sharp as a lens that goes from 28 to 70. Simply because, again, the amount of glass, the amount of optics that go in there will reduce that sharpness. Now, counteract that with the more expensive versions that will improve it and increase it a little bit. So it is that balancing act, but typically, if it's got a shorter zoom range, it's more likely to be sharper than one with this huge zoom range on your camera. Oh, I thought I'd just gone through that one, but clearly not. All right, so let's have a look now at some of the techniques for getting the sharpest possible image out of whatever glass you're shooting through. And we're going to look at a number of things, including getting your focusing right. If you focus on the right part of the image, you're more likely to get your subject in focus. Focusing can hunt. And if you try to focus on a plain bit of the image, if you try and put your focusing point over the sky, or for example, if you were trying to focus on me and you put the focusing point on my forehead, I've not got many wrinkles there, at least I don't think I have. There's not much area of contrast. You put that focus point on my eye or on my specs, then it's got something to lock on with. It will focus better. It won't hunt. You're more likely to get your final image in focus. Another thing to think about in terms of doing the right kind of focusing is where you focus if you're after getting the depth of field right. So we talked last week about hyperfocal distance. So if you haven't watched it, and as we were saying in the chat, I know who you are. No, if you haven't watched that and want to know a little bit more about hyperfocal distance, go and have a look at that last week's, because it's only you don't want to be focusing on infinity. You're going to lose a fair bit with that. So learn how to use that and maximize your depth of field, because that will improve how much of your image is in sharp focus. And the more that's in sharp focus, the more likely that the things you want to be sharp will be sharp on there. And use the optimal aperture for your lens. Lenses typically don't have the same amount of sharpness associated with them across their entire aperture range. And for most lenses, it's f8 to f11 that's the sharpest. So I always say, if depth of field is not an issue in the image that you're creating, set your camera to f8 because that's where it'll be sharpest, typically. A few people have said they've got lenses which are a little bit sharper at f11 rather than f8. I don't think there's usually that much in it. The reason I always say f8 is if you look at the specs and the tests that get done on lenses for sharpness, they're always done at maximum aperture and typically smallest aperture and f8. Now, if you are going to if you are manufacturing a lens and you know that lens is going to get tested by the reviewers for sharpness at f8, where are you going to make sure it's sharpest? f8. So that's typically where it would be. And also, typically, remember that above f16, you might get a wider, a deeper depth of field, but you are going to compromise on the softness. Your final image might be just a little bit soft on there. Next practical tip is remember the rule of thumb for handheld shutter speeds. And if you can't remember that, shame on you. The rule behind it, I've talked about it many a time on here, it's 1 over the focal length, or the 35mm equivalent focal length. So if you are shooting with a full frame camera and using a 100mm lens, you need your shutter speed to be at least 1/100th of a second. If you are shooting with a crop factor camera, for example, one of the Nikons, which has a focal length multiplier of 1.5, you are going to, and you're shooting with a 50mm lens, to be able to handhold it, assuming nothing else like image stabilization, you need a shutter speed of 1/75th of a second. Why 1/75th of a second? 50mm lens times 1.5 crop factor gives you 75, therefore 1/75th of a second on that. What about image stabilization? That will help you. That will help you deal with camera shake, as does shooting at the right shutter speed on there. And that can typically, I'd say for most cameras, 1 or 2 stops of stabilization. That's certainly what I found with my 5D Mark III. They claim 2 to 3. I think it was 1 to 2. I think it's always less than what they claim. So that's typically what I would expect. So what does that mean in practice? It means that we previously said, if you were shooting with a 200mm lens to handhold it, you need to be shooting at 1/200th of a second or faster. But if you've got 1 to 2 stops of stabilization, you should be able to then hold that at 1/100th of a second, or possibly even 1/50th of a second. And that's a big help. But you need to understand what your camera and your lens can actually give. Recently, Canon launched the R series, and particularly the R5 and R6, and one of the claims they had for the R5 was that it can give you up to 8 stops of image stabilization, providing you're using the optimized RF series lenses, and providing on the camera, because you've got in camera stabilization, you've got lens based stabilization, and the two will talk to each other, and they claim up to about 8 stops. I've not had that, but I have had fairly close. I've had 5 stops easily out of that. And today I was shooting some items. They were just quick shots for a blog post that I'm hoping to write in the future. It was just an object on the table, and I was shooting handheld at 1/10 of a second, and they were coming out sharp. The image stabilization was working for me on that. So make the use of image stabilization when you're hand holding. The other side of that is turn it off when you're not hand holding, when you're on tripod, because when it's on tripod and you've got long shutter speed, it will cause blur. Why is it? Because the way image stabilization works, it has these little gyroscopes. And those gyroscopes detect movement, and it moves either a lens or the sensor or both to counteract that movement. Now, if you've got your camera rock solid on a tripod and there's no movement for it to detect, what happens? Those little gyroscopes go whiz, 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 trying to find the movement. And in doing that, they introduce it. So you get blurred images. I did a shoot many years ago in Blackpool of the illuminations, and all bar a handful of shots I lost because I forgot to turn off image stabilization. So be warned on that. And talking of tripods, make sure you're using a solid tripod. That will enable you to avoid that softness due to camera shake. Make sure it's nice and solid on there. Because if you've got a wobbly tripod, you'll get wobbly images, you'll get blurred images on there. Use a remote trigger, or if you haven't got one, put the camera on timer so you aren't touching it. Again, reduces all the vibration that's associated with it. Consider using mirror lockup if you're shooting with an SLR, or electronic shutter if you're shooting with mirrorless, so that you haven't got the vibration from the mirror going clunk up, or the shutter opening on the camera, both of which can introduce a little bit of vibration on there. And another one just to be aware of, because I've been caught out on this one, excuse me. I've been caught out on this one. Beware of environmental vibrations. I've shot, typically when I've been photographing billboards, I've shot near main roads, and the effects of traffic going past can cause blur on the images. Wind, obviously, again, the more solid the tripod is, the less likely it is to be affected by wind causing vibration. But the real killer, and one we tend to forget about, is shooting on bridges. We do it a lot for night photography, don't we? Because you get those light trails of the traffic below. But bridges vibrate, and that gets translated into the image. Now, if you have got those vibrations, it's worth doing a series of shots with the image stabilization on, and then a series with it off. And sometimes you'll find that you'll get sharp images on both sides of that divide, and you'll get blurred images on both sides of that divide. But it just gives you more options in the edit to cover your bases with that. So it's worth trying that on there. If you've got a DSLR, and I do mean DSLR, and this doesn't apply to all DSLRs, consider getting your lens calibrated. A lot of DSLRs have the option to set micro adjustments for the autofocus. You don't need to do this for mirrorless cameras and bridge cameras and compact cameras. You can't do it, and not every DSLR can you do it on. My 5D Classic, you can't on that. My 5D Mark III, you could with it. But you will need some specialist software such as Focal, and I'm not sure I've got the correct way they write that. I'm sure there's either uppercase, lowercase letters in there, but you'd soon find it searching on Focal lens calibration with that. Right, before I talk about our sponsor, I just want to go over to chat because a few things come in there which are worth talking about. Gary says, I agree with sharp lenses. He says, Ian, would you also agree there's a lot of creativity and fun to be had using old, softer manual lenses? He's just in the process of getting an ancient Russian Helios 44-2. Right, yes, there are things you can do with softness. You can use softness to create interesting images. I have a shot, and if I think on, I will put it up on the Facebook group a little bit later, which is a very soft image, not caused by the lens, but caused by the environment. I was tracking a pelican, it went behind some trees, and the whole thing is soft because of that, but it really works artistically. So yes, think about that sort of thing. Oh, actually, I know where else I might be able to find it, so just bear with me a moment while I go to a particular website, and I can pull this up, I think. Yes, here we go. So if I come over here, this is your portfolio website. If you want to join it, then use the referrer ID up at the top there. You can see this is looking a bit better now. But here's the photo I was talking about. And it's a pelican going behind some trees. And I was tracking it, so it's in focus, but it's soft. It's soft as anything, but creatively it works. So the answer to your question, Gary, is yes, you can do things like that. But tonight's show is all about sharpness. So that's why I'm talking about it, not talking about softness. Maybe in the future I'll do an evening all about creating soft images and how you can use that on there. So right, let me go back. Oh, right, okay, where do I want to be? I want to be back in chat, don't I? Yes. Right. So Walter asks, would I turn image stabilization off if the camera is mounted on a monopod? No, I would leave it on because a monopod has a little bit of movement to it, so I would leave it on. And Gary says, I discovered recently the most recent IS Canon lenses detect tripod mounting and switch themselves off. Ooh, that's clever. I'll have to try that with my RF 24-105 lens and see whether that does it. Find out whether it does it, because that would be really useful for me, because I have been known to forget on there. So right, okay, moving on. Right. I say this every week, and I do mean it most sincerely every week, that I am very grateful to everyone who sponsors this show, which is you folks. It's sponsored by you through the I call it Buy Me a Cuppa. It's actually Buy Me a Coffee. So if you do find these shows helpful, you want to support keeping me on air, then please think about buying me a cuppa through the site. You can find the link here. It's also down in the show notes. So please think about doing that. Because it will help me. Every little helps. And every week I say thank you to somebody who's bought me a cuppa. I don't think he's watching tonight, although he was last time. Peter Stanford, cheers. Thanks for the cuppa. Right, moving along. Just to say, also a thank you to everyone who has subscribed, liked and shared this live stream. If you haven't done all 3 of those tonight, why not? No, seriously, if you haven't liked it, we've got 13 people watching at the moment and only 4 likes. So the remaining 9 of you, go and hit that thumbs up button at this point in the show or somewhere around about here. And do subscribe and click the bell icon if you haven't done so already. And thank you to everyone who has shared about this and told people about it. I really appreciate it. Please also, if you're not a member of my Facebook group, the link's down below. That's where I pull images from for review as well as by email. And it's also where we carry on the conversation during the week. Please consider joining that and signing up for my newsletter. Again, links for those are down below. So have a look at those and sign up for both on there. Right, let's talk about sharpening in post-production. And first of all, let's talk about why this is necessary. It's necessary because the way the sensors work in digital cameras. This wasn't necessary in film because basically the film just worked. The way sensors work in digital cameras, you've actually got 2 filters in front of your sensors. The sensors just measure light. They're sensor sites. They just capture and say how bright the light is at that individual point. That's all they're doing. To get the colour information, some of them have effectively a little filter over it, so it only measures red light or blue light or green light. Actually, there's twice as many green sensors as there are red or blue ones. And that filter is the Bayer filter. But the one that causes more of the problems is the high-pass filter, or anti-aliasing filter, or sometimes people think of it as the infrared filter because it does cut out infrared light, and that's there to remove artifacts such as moire patterns, and basically it's the anti-aliasing and all that. And the way it does it is it has to soften the image slightly. So your raw data is automatically a little bit soft. Now, if you are shooting JPEG, the camera will go through a sharpening cycle as part of that conversion, and it will add back in the sharpness that has been taken out by that filter to a certain extent, but it puts most of it back on there. But if you are shooting raw, you need to put that sharpness back in post-production. It's almost an essential step to make your image look right. Now, in addition to all of that, there's another point where your image goes a little bit soft, and that's when you resize it. Now, you can understand when you go up, but even when you downsize an image and you make it smaller, maybe for web use or for printing, you are actually going to be combining adjacent pixels there. And because you're combining things together, what's going to go on? Well, it's going to add a certain amount of softness because you're approximating colours, you're combining things together, and it does soften the image just slightly, but not as much as is caused by the filters. So we've got 2 areas that we need to deal with. So ideally, the ideal situation is that you do all your sharpening after you've processed your image and after you've done your resizing. So you do it once and you sort the sharpness out once right at the end. However, typically that's just not a workable way of doing it. Stock photographers do, by the way, allegedly. When I started doing stock, we were told no sharpening whatsoever. Now, as time's gone on, they've accepted a small amount of what I will refer to, and you'll see why I refer to it, as input sharpening, but no output sharpening for stock, because that should be done once after the final size has been worked out. So if that image was going to be used as a double page spread, it would want sizing for that and then sharpening. If it was going to be used as a small feature image on a page, it would want resizing and sharpening for that. So typically, or ideally, I should say, ideally you want to do your sharpening after the resizing, but that's just not practical for photographers. So what tends to happen is we split the sharpening into two phases. One is invariably called output sharpening, and Lightroom refers to it as that. The other, I tend to call it input sharpening, because it's done as you're bringing not as you're bringing them in, but it's done as you're processing at that stage. It's also, I've seen it referred to as raw sharpening. So we've got these two types of sharpening that's going on, and that you need to do both, or you do it all at the end on there. But you certainly need some output sharpening. So let's have a look at how this happens in Lightroom. On the export page, when you export an image, you have got this option for output sharpening on there, and there's not a great deal on there. You either tick it to do it, or you untick it not to do it, and you choose whether you're going to do it for screen, for glossy prints, or matte prints, because they need different levels of sharpening, and you can say minimal, standard, or high, I think are the three settings on there. Standard tends to be sufficient for most things, and as the majority of my stuff is going to screen, I tend to leave it at that. And to be honest, I find that tends to work for my prints as well. I've not found a particular problem with that, but then most of my prints I do generate through the print screen, but I go away with it on there. So that's your output sharpening. It's just counteracting, it's just adding just a little bit of sharpening just to counteract the resizing, and that's all it's doing. It's not doing the input sharpening, which is making sure that you counteract the effect of those filters. So how do we do that in Lightroom? Well, you do it in the detail panel in Lightroom, and let me go through what this works and how it works. First of all, this is important to understand how sharpening actually works, because typically sharpening works by finding edges in the image and looking at that. An edge is basically a transition from a dark area to a light area, from a darker area to a lighter area. And having found those edges, it darkens a little bit on the dark side and lightens a little bit on the light side, which gives the impression of that edge being sharper. So that's how it does it. And once you understand how it does it, the controls make a lot more sense. It can cause a halo, though, if you've not done it properly. And I'm going to show you this in Lightroom very shortly. So these sliders, the top one is the amount. And this basically controls the amount of sharpening that you're going to get. In other words, how dark is the black it's going to add, and how bright is the white that it's going to add to the edges that it finds. So that's what the amount is all about. And the trick really is just move that slider to a point where the halos aren't visible in Lightroom. Then you've got the radius. And what the radius describes is, having found an edge, it describes how far out from the edge this darkening and lightening is going to be applied. So the larger that area, the more likely you are to see those halos appearing on your image. So that's the radius on there. And then you've got the detail. The detail slider basically controls the algorithm that searches for these edges. So you move it up further, it works harder and finds more and more edges to sharpen, and it makes them, so it makes more of your image. Now, you get to a point where if you've got grain in your image, so noise in your image, or you've got something that's grainy like sand, it can do too much. So you don't want to go too far with it, but that's what it's actually doing. It brings out more texture, which can be a bad thing on skin, for example. You might want it on a rock, but you don't want it on skin. So that allows you to control basically how hard it searches. The final slider is probably the most useful slider of all. This is the masking slider, and it enables you to have a high level of sharpening, but to prevent certain areas, smoother areas, from getting more sharpening than it needs. So the sky, for example, you might, if you start to see the noise coming through there, you can use the masking to protect it. And the way it works on this, for this one, you really do need to hold the Alt key, or the Option key if you're on a Mac. Hold that. When you start off with a white screen, you move the slider, and basically, actually, which way around is it? I can never remember when it's not in front of me. You'll see in a minute anyway. And you'll see the areas that this is applying to. White areas it's applying to, black areas it's not. I'm convinced it's that way around. We'll find out in a minute. See, I don't need to actually know it because it happens all on the screen, obviously, on there. It becomes obvious on it. And you can control it. So only the edges that you want sharpening get sharpened. So using all those, you've got a lot of control in Lightroom to sharpen your image. So that's that. I'm going to give you a quick demo of that in a moment. But let me just explain and give a brief intro to frequency separation. And frequency separation is not something you can do in Lightroom. It's something you have to do in Photoshop. It's quite an advanced technique. It does take more work, and I'm going to show you how to do it on there, and how you can then really control that sharpening by doing it. So, hey, we had 14 viewers then. Great, we're going up. Right, let me head over to, first of all, to Lightroom. And I've got 3 images here. Let's start by looking at this image. And I'm going to go into the Develop module and show you how sharpening works in Lightroom with it. Actually, no, I'm going to... Shall I use this one because it's the one I'm going to use in the other? Right. So typically, when you do sharpening, you want to view your image at 100%. Let me go full screen so you can see all this. I'll go to the detail panel on there. Now, I can choose which bit shows on there by clicking on this item and selecting something, but I tend to find I just use the whole screen on here. So now you can see I've got no sharpening in there. I'm holding the Alt key down and it goes to black and white because it's easier to see this on there. So I'm moving up and you can see that grain hopefully coming in. If I go all the way up, you can see that noise in the sky, which I don't want. I've not got any I'm starting to see halos down here with the sharpening. So if I go down, you can see it's gone. I can just bring this up until that's about as far as I can go without getting halos on there. And the same with the radius. Now, you see as I bring that in, can you see how, again, holding the Alt key, how much that goes on the edge of there. It's easier to see it in this grey mode, that light, white and dark areas which are being put on there. So I can bring that up, typically 1 or more on there. I think that's about the limit I'm going to be able to go on that without getting too... See, I've already got a little bit of the halos appearing on there. Just a slight edge on it with it. Detail, again, if I show you all the way and then none, you can see it's just bringing in the items are, I think, about there. Now, I want to deal with this sky, which is getting far too much sharpening on there, and I use the masking. It's all white, which means all those are being sharpened. As I bring this up, you can see now I need to bring it far enough so that the sky is black. So that's not getting sharpened, but these edges are. So there we go. That's the completed thing. And now if I turn this on and off, you'll be able to see the effect of sharpening here in Lightroom. So it's subtle. I'm hoping you can see that on the video. I can certainly see it here, probably more around this area. Turn it on. I might risk going up a little bit more with it on there. And yeah, you can now see it more around this sort of area, the effect that it has. It's just popping in that little bit more on there. Might need to just do a bit more masking. No, I'm fine on there with that. Once you've masked, you can usually then push things up just a fraction more. Really don't want to push things any further now because I'm getting that halo around the edge there, which probably you won't see it at that sort of level, but it is there. Now, what I'm going to do, because I want to open this image in Photoshop to do the frequency separation, I'm going to reset all the sharpening that's in here and just do it all. So hold the Alt key and select Reset Sharpening. The amount's down at 0, so there's absolutely none on there with it. So edit in Photoshop, and we will have well, I suppose edit original, actually. That won't have any of the sharpening on. So here we are in Photoshop. Again, I'm going to go full screen so you can see all that I'm doing with this. Right, okay, now I'm going to need to play around with some of these windows as we go so you can see everything. Right, the important thing to look at the moment is down here, the layers. I'm just going to zoom in again onto that same point that we were before. Yep, I want 100% on there. Oh, 100%. Hold the space bar, I can drag this around then, and we can see that top section that I was working on previously. So there's our image. We want to get this sharpened. So the first thing I want to do is I need to create a couple of extra layers. So Control J twice will give me 2 layers. Now, the reason it's called frequency separation is because we're dividing the image into 2 of its component parts. The first part contains the color information, which is the low frequency information. The second part is the detail information, but without any color, and that's effectively high frequency. So that's why it's called frequency separation. So I've got 2 layers here. I'm going to call the bottom one color. Spell it the English way, not the American. The top one I am going to call detail. And I'm going to put those in a group so that I can turn this sharpening on and off as we go through. So either Control G or the little icon at the bottom, Control G, we'll put them in a group, and I expand that. Now I'm going to convert the color layer to a smart object. Now you don't have to do this, but I find it helpful because it means I can then adjust what I'm about to do next later on. So convert that to a smart object. And it goes dum-de-dum-de-dum and thinks about it. Come on. Yep, we've got there. Now, why do I want to do it as a smart object? Because I want to do smart filters on there. And I'm going to apply a Gaussian filter to it. So filter, blur, Gaussian blur, or Gaussian blur, depending on how you wish to pronounce it. And you really want to set this between 3 and 5, somewhere that sort of range. So basically, we're removing all the detail from this layer. So we've just got this sort of blurred image. That's the color information that we've got. So we've got all that there. You can see I've been practicing this for 4 pixels, and okay. Now you can't see that at the moment, but if I take that off, you can see it's now a soft image. Now with the other layer, the detail layer, we want to remove all the color information and just have that detail set to it. So I select the detail layer, and now I do that by using a tool that doesn't get talked about very much in Photoshop, which is on the image menu, and it's called Apply Image. Now this isn't the place for me to talk about what Apply Image does, partly because I don't really know that much about it myself. It's not a tool I normally use. But the settings you want on this is, first of all, is you want to select the background layer. So it's going to apply this layer to the background layer on there. And we've got a blending mode, and the mode we want is add, and we want to invert it. And that gives us an image where you should be able to see some information on it. As I've done that, it's changed from background, I meant it should be the color layer. That's what we're looking for. We've got that basically gray image, which is just the detail information. The important things to say: opacity 100% and scale 2 and invert on there is what you want on it. So, okay. So now that looks horrible, but what we now need to do is we need to set the blend mode, and we set it to either linear light or vivid light. Now I find linear light works best. You can see vivid light has a bit of a glow to it, which I don't like. Linear light is really the one to go for. So now, what have I done? If I just move this up a little bit, I've split this background image, the background layer, into 2 separate layers. So I can turn that off. We've got it here, and I've got just a detail layer, and I've got just a color layer, which is the blurred one on there. And I'll put the background one underneath. If I toggle the group on and off, you will be able to see absolutely no difference in the image at all. So far, all I've done is just to split this image into its components, the 2 frequencies, the color and the detail. So having now done that, what I now need to do is I want to be able to do some adjustments to do the sharpening. And the way we do that is with a curves layer. So I select the detail layer, I select an adjustment layer, curves. Now again, we'll move this down, which is above the detail layer, but I only want this to apply to the detail layer. And the way I do that is I apply a clipping mask, hold the Alt key down and hover the mouse between the join, and you can see the icon changes there. I click on that. that means that what I do on the curves layer only applies to this detail layer. I want to see the whole thing because I want to put in here a control point bang in the middle, and that needs to be at 128, 128. And again, just to confirm that we've got no difference at all in our image between the background, the original image, and this image that these layers that we're working on. Now, what we do here is we pin the midpoint. If I was to change the midpoint up to, I don't know, 140, like that, the image gets lighter. If I went down to, say, 100, the image gets darker. So we want it at 128, so that keeps everything bang in the middle of the of where it should be. I can now control these lines above. Now, look what happens. The bottom half here of the curve controls the amount of dark that gets added to those edges. So as I pull that down, we're getting some sharpening going on by just adding a little bit of dark to the edge. And on here, I'm adding light. Now, I'm going to pull this all the way up. Can you see those white edges appearing, particularly down here? On this, we've got those halos appearing. That's gone obviously way too far. So I can control that. Now, what I can't show you on this image because I haven't, well, maybe I can. Remember, I'm just going to delete that pin there and delete that pin there. Remember I was saying we were starting to see just a little bit of edges on there? You're going to struggle to see this, but there is a very, very slight edge on there, light edge on there. I've done too good a job of making sure this wasn't sharpened and that my blues weren't oversaturated. But I can actually get rid of those edges by just bringing the white side down a little bit, and that actually helps get rid of any of those white edges that we've got, those white halos. You don't need to go far. It doesn't do particularly well if they're very obvious, but it does help with it. And now I can just add the darker sharpening in there to whatever level I like. So I'll try and get it looking quite realistic on that. So now I've got that in there. So that is my frequency separation sharpening. And now to prove it, I can, with this group, I can toggle the group on and off, and hopefully you will see the difference. That's off, that's on. Now, that's not much. If I can bring it a little bit further over, a bit more sharp on there, that's probably too far. I'm going to put an extra control point in on that. So now you can see it going on and off. That's too far. Get rid of that extra control point, bring that back. And there, now we're starting to look at something that's a lot sharper. I don't know how this is coming off on video, but hopefully you can see the effect of all that and that it's working. Now, with something like this, you might find it sharpens things that we don't want on there. So I can toggle on and off and find things like that. Let's try and find something that we don't want. Sharpening. I quite like the bricks on there. They come out quite nicely. Maybe I don't want these trees up here to be sharpened on there. So let's just have a look what it would look like. That's without. Actually, you can't see any difference at all with those trees with it. But basically, you have the option now with the group, if you add a layer mask on there, and there was part of the image you felt was being sharpened that you didn't want, let's have a look what happens with the sky. with this image. Yeah, I don't know whether you'll be able to see it, folks. I can certainly see it. I'll tell you what, if I go to the curves and make sure it's really obvious on here, I've gone way too far on this, but I just want to show the effect on this. We've got all that grain in the sky. We might want to get rid of that. So we've got this mask layer here, and I can get my my brush. I can set the flow right up, make it a nice large brush, make sure it's, well, I'm going to make it pretty soft on there. And can you see, I can now manually mask out bits I don't want to be sharpened. So I can make sure all the sky goes and isn't sharpened. Again, I've over sharpened it just to show the example here. But now you can see I've got this edge on here that we don't want. So if I take my brush right down to a small edge, I can now just paint out that halo effect all the way down there, because I'm saying, right, I don't want that bit to be sharpened. I want the detail in the building to be sharpened. I don't want that particular edge sharpened. You would never be able to do anything like that within Lightroom at that sort of level of detail with it. So that, I'm going to correct that. It's really annoying me, that over sharpened look on there. Control-0 to see my whole image, and we've got a nice sharp image on there. So that's how you would do it. Those are the steps that's involved. Now that's a lot of steps to do. So let's suppose you want to do this, you're doing this regularly, and let's suppose I've got an image like this one, and I'm going to say edit in Photoshop. We'll say original. If you set up an action within Photoshop, if you don't know how to do actions, maybe I'll do something on that later if there's an interest there. I've set up an action to record me doing the frequency separation, and I can just go through, hit that, and let it whir away, which will take a few moments to actually do that. Dum-de-dum-de-dum. And we are there. So close that. So now what I can do with this is, if I zoom in to 100% for you, you can see the difference that it's made. That's 100% on there, and I can turn that group on and off. That's without sharpening, that's with. My curves have been put in there, so I can then decide to change that if I felt it had gone a little too far with it, to something like that. And again, I can just toggle that on and off to sharpen it with frequency separation. And we've got this lovely detail through the whole thing on here. And can you see just how sharp that is? That is cracking, isn't it? So that's how you do it, using an action on there. So it's really nice and simple. I can now just say, yeah, that is done, and just save it. Yeah, I know. On that, I'm not going to bother with that one. So there we go. That is frequency separation sharpening within Photoshop. Right, let me go and have a look what's been going on in chat while I've been doing that. Get rid of Photoshop, don't need that anymore. Right, okay. Right, Walter's saying he uses Photoshop. Can you walk through the unsharp mask and smart sharpen? I can do, but not tonight. I'm already way over my time. Sorry, folks. Right, I'll do that on another show in a couple of weeks' time on there, and I'll perhaps look at it in Affinity as well, because I know some people want me to cover Affinity stuff with that. So moving on, feedback. I've got a couple of images from Facebook this week. Let me go back to Lightroom and quickly go through those. John Barton, right, this image which you posted to the Facebook group, and I immediately said, I know what you've done the fake reflection on there. How did I know? Because you've reflected the reflections. If you look here at that bit, that's a reflection of that, and then you've got a reflection of it. And this bit here is a reflection of the motor, which you've then reflected there. So basically, you need to crop the line through the base of the boat to do that. So the image you should have started with should have been like that to do the effect, not like that you did the effect on, or close enough to that. So that was how I worked it out, because I know you issued me the challenge to work out what you had done on there. The one thing to just be aware of with this, slightly soft. Well, tonight you've heard the reasons why that might be on there. Yeah, this one, I do like this. I like the silhouette, but it needs a little bit of post-production work. Basically, needs some contrast going into it. And the camera has taken out some of the colour, I think, of that sunset. So I'd be tempted just to bring that up, bring those highlights down a little bit, just to keep the silhouette in there. Bit of clarity up, not much, maybe a little bit of dehaze, and that is going from there to there with it, which I think is probably a little bit more what you were after. So all those sort of changes that I've done, I don't know whether you have Lightroom, John, but if you don't, look, I know you do a lot of stuff on phones, then look at Snapseed for doing that. Again, those sort of tools will be available in Affinity Photo as well to do those sort of adjustments. So think about doing that. Barry, thank you for submitting some images to the group. Obviously, I haven't got the settings on these. That's 100% on there as far as I've got with it. It's a lovely shot of the seal, and I love the fact, as far as I can tell, it's in focus of a small resolution. I'm just a little concerned it might be slightly forward focused. You might have got the focus on the whiskers rather than the eyes on there, but very, very difficult to tell at this sort of resolution. But it's a lovely shot. The only thing I would suggest is the crop on it. This side's not adding much. I'd be tempted just to bring that in just a fraction on there to something like that, and I think that works slightly better on there. As long-time viewers of the show know, I'm a big fan of vignettes. I think they can really help a photo, so I'd just put a little bit of a vignette on as well with it, just to darken the edges slightly with something like that. But really lovely shot on that. Moving on. Again, nice shot, Barry. I don't know what camera you were using for it on there. I'm just going to get that to fit, I think, on it. One thing just to be aware of is that beak is perilously close to the edge of the frame, and it looks like you've cropped this. So I don't know whether you've cropped some off this side or you've cropped some off this side, but you could do with just a little bit more space on this side for it. if you were to get a print made on this, the bleed would take that to have the tip of the beak just off there. But it's a great image. Again, I can't tell about critical focus on this resolution, but nice shot. The other thing I would try to avoid is losing the foot at the bottom of the image as well. So if you could try and keep those in so that you don't lose key features like that on the shot. But it is a lovely shot, nicely done on there. I do like this one, and I think there's an optical illusion going on here. This pole looks as though it's tilted to me, and I don't know whether it is or not, but I think if we go over to transform and I use guided, I can correct that if I need to. That looks like it is indeed sloping slightly there, and do the same there. Yeah, there was just a slight change, wasn't there? But I love the colours on this. The light blue with the sky works well on there. Again, can't tell about critical focus. If I go to 100%, no, I just can't tell with it on there. I wonder whether your focus has gone onto here though, onto the get rid of that, onto the front of the metalwork rather than the bird. It just feels as though that's a bit sharper than the bird, but I don't know without seeing the full resolution image. But it is a lovely shot, Barry, and well spotted and well captured on there. Right, this one, I like this with those different layers on there. I'm going to try some of that. I haven't tried this in advance, so this may go all horribly wrong, but yeah, I was trying to get that colour back in there with it, which is proving a little bit tricky. So I can't do it that way. I'm just going to try one other way using a gradient tool, and I'm going to cheat this. If I do the gradient tool down below like that, so it's applying to the whole of it, and why is that? Ah, saturation. That's why. Let's try. No, not with that one. I mean that one, and I just want to put a colour over it, and I want the orange. Come on, where's the orange gone? It's around here somewhere. And it's interacting with it, so it's not quite working. I was just trying to get that colour back. If I had a bit more time, I should have practiced this one beforehand. I could have done it, I'm sure. I'm going to get rid of that on there and come out of that. Colour grading might do it also on the midtones. Can I just bring in the orange that way? Possibly. We're getting something. Let's find the right colour with it. There, and a little bit with the shadows. By not doing the highlights and protecting the sun on it. I just want that to go orange. Go golden orange. Come on. Yeah, I think that's probably the best I could do with it. Sorry, that took me several goes. Now I've got that, though, then maybe, yeah, bring that in. A little bit of dehaze, no, not dehaze. A little bit of clarity with it, and a little bit of contrast. Maybe pull the blacks down to something like that. Let's see what that looks like. I don't know whether I've improved it or not, to be honest with you, with that. But yeah, now I'm seeing yours, and yeah, I do quite like yours, to be honest, your version. So yeah, those are the ones I had this week on there. Let's finally go back over to my slides and move in on there. So it just leaves me to come up with the member photo of the week this week, and it is, drum roll please, it's this one from Barry, which the bird, is it a cormorant maybe, on the ironwork there. That's going to be the photo of the week, and that's what it will look like on the final thing. I think I corrected those verticals when I did it. I've extended the background a little bit to make it work, and I flipped it because it looks better looking at my logo than not looking at it, to be honest. So hopefully you don't mind the changes I did to it, Barry. I will change that image online very shortly. And whose image will it be next week? Well, get your images submitted to Facebook group and it might be yours. What have we got in the live chat? Well, I can see there's nothing new in there on it. So it just remains for me to say, next Sunday, I'm going to talk about 5 proven ways to improve your photography. Whatever level you're at, these 5 things, if you do them, will improve your photography. 5 steps to improve your photography next week. Please post and share your images in the Facebook group during the week, so I've got something to talk about. And if you've got any images you want me to process, to feedback on in more detail, send them to feedback@ians-studio.co.uk. And I will see you next week. And until then, thanks for watching and keep making great photos. Bye for now.